Will Ukraine lose the war if the United States pulls out? No. Will the Ukrainians suffer dramatically, and will there be a greater loss of civilian and military lives as a result of the U.S. pulling out? Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've spoken to Sir Bill Browder. He's come on the show to speak about the fact that the United States government has officially revoked some military equipment they were meant to send to Ukraine, and it's now gone to the Middle East. So what that means, whether that's the start of the US backing away from supporting Ukraine. We also speak about this bipartisan bill that is supposedly meant to pass in the Senate, which would hit any country importing Russian energy with 500% tariff, how effective this would be, why Donald Trump has been delaying this. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast anywhere you get your podcast. So Bill Browder, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Great to be here.
Bill, it was reported last week, but it's now being confirmed by President Zelensky that the Defense Secretary of the United States, Pete Hegseth, he redirected around 20,000 anti-drone missiles that were meant to be sent to Ukraine. He's then sent them to US troops in the Middle East instead. Zelensky said that they were counting on these anti-drone missiles. So how worrying is this we start to see this?
Well, I think this is the first in many signs that we're going to see in the coming weeks and months of the U.S. effectively withdrawing from supporting Ukraine. Trump has made no secret of it. Pete Hegseth has made no secret of it. Marco Rubio has made no secret of it. The U.S. is effectively washing its hands of Ukraine. And what's really important to understand is when they say they've given up on trying to mediate a solution to this whole thing. What they're really saying is they're giving up on supporting Ukraine to give Putin a military advantage. That's what's happening here. And it's tragic. It will lead to loss of civilian life. A lot of people are going to be killed, civilians killed in Ukraine, and that is the direct result of U.S. withdrawing their support.
But Bill, we wondered if Donald Trump would grow frustrated with the lack of mediation, the lack of negotiation. And you've said it from the start that these negotiations with Trump would never lead anywhere. But we did think perhaps the United States would at least keep up military aid and intelligence.
Well, so what's happening so far is that the Ukrainians have U.S. military aid, which will run out at the end of the year. And this was military aid that was approved by Congress and supplied prior to Trump. And as time has gone on, even some of that military aid is being diverted, as we've seen with these anti-drone equipment. And we're not going to see Donald Trump going back to Congress to approve any more military aid. And then the question is intelligence. And that's a big wild card. But to the extent that Trump has shown his affinity towards Putin, one can assume that at some point in time that intelligence sharing is also going to cease.
The only thing we can counter with Trump is that if it doesn't look good on him, it doesn't look good on his legacy, then he might change the course, Bill. So if this does happen, Donald Trump decides, okay, we're going to we're going to get rid of aid, we're going to get rid of intelligence, we're going to wipe our hands clean of anything to do with Russia, Ukraine. How badly will this look on Trump's administration?
Well, he doesn't seem to be too concerned about his legacy based on many other tactics and factors that he's using. I mean, how is it going to look on his legacy, that blow up at the Oval Office where he attacked the victim, Zelensky, the Ukrainians? I mean, I don't believe that he's even thinking about his legacy. I think he's thinking about his deal making. He thinks he can make a deal with Putin. I don't know what he's getting on the other side of this deal, but it certainly is not supporting the Western world and the Europeans and the Ukrainians. It seems to be siding with Vladimir Putin.
But we did think he was thinking about his Nobel Peace Prize, Bill. So I think that he's obviously going to be relinquishing any chance of at least getting that? Because we know that he's been very keen on getting one of them, but of course, by not, ending the war in 24 hours, or at least his first 6 months of the administration, then that's out of the question.
Well, I think this whole idea of him getting a Nobel Peace Prize is a sort of a fantasy. It's like a sort of lottery ticket that he's not going to win. He's in his conduct with Russia and Ukraine, he's done nothing that would win him a Nobel Peace Prize.
If the United States does withdraw intelligence, or kind of just stops negotiations, stops involvement in this war in general, are you confident that the EU, that NATO allies can have the facilities, have the capabilities military-wise to replace what the US might take away?
Well, it's not a sort of yes-no answer. So the Europeans have a lot of resources at their disposal. They've provided about 60% of military aid, and that aid will continue. The Europeans also have access to $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that have been frozen that can be confiscated to use towards Ukraine. And so from a financial standpoint, it's not all that dire. But the United States has certain equipment that only they make. The United States, for example, are the only people that make Patriot missiles that shoot down foreign objects coming into Ukraine. The United States has a big supply of anti-drone technology that other people can't provide. And perhaps most importantly, the United States has an unbelievable amount of satellite intelligence. The U.S. has more spy satellites than everybody else combined. If the U.S. wants to know what you've had on your sandwich, they can see that from space. And that's, if they withdraw that, that will be devastating, because effectively the Ukrainians will be flying blind in terms of not knowing when the Russians are launching an attack, not knowing when Russians are moving troops closer to the Ukrainian territory and various things like that. And so I think that's a particularly worrying part of the whole story. And so will Ukraine lose the war if the United States pulls out? No. Will the Ukrainians suffer dramatically, and will there be a greater loss of civilian and military lives as a result of the U.S. pulling out? Absolutely.
And do we have any developments on this $300 billion of frozen Russian assets? Bill, you and I have spoken about it so many times, and there was always the thought process that perhaps they would at least use it to buy American military equipment so that the US was somehow involved. But we haven't really had many major developments on that as of late, or especially in the last few weeks.
Well, so there's a new German chancellor. He's not that new, but he's pretty new. There's a budget crisis in the UK. There's a budget crisis in various other countries. It's not something which and it's something that has to be decided. And I think what will determine the outcome of this $300 billion is very simply, numbers, financial numbers. At the end of the day, when the U.S. makes it clear that they're pulling out, and I think that every day we get closer to that certainty, then the Europeans will have to make one of two choices. Either they raise taxes further on their own citizens in order to support Ukraine, or they let Vladimir Putin pay for it. And when governments are faced with that choice, it's a much easier choice to make than to do this thing theoretically about the idea of the U.S. pulling out. I mean, at the moment, all these governments are sitting there and sort of trying to cajole and placate and convince Donald Trump to stay in the game, to continue to support Ukraine, to do what the previous American administration had done. And when it becomes clear that that's not going to happen, then we come to Plan B. And then what is Plan B? Either raising taxes or confiscating Putin's money. I think the choice is very simple.
Bill, we didn't really hear much from Donald Trump after Operation Spiderweb, which is, of course, Ukraine's successful mission where they shot down various Russian aircrafts last week. We've been waiting for Donald Trump to say something, but then on Friday he finally told reporters, he said Ukraine gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of them last night. That's the thing I don't like about it. When I saw it, I said, here we go. Now it's going to be a strike. What's your reaction to when you have the President of the United States coming out and that's his reaction to Ukraine's successful mission?
Well, it's so obviously biased towards Putin. I mean, the rest of the world was cheering as Ukraine has basically decapitated a third of Russia's strategic bombing capability. And by the way, this doesn't just benefit Ukraine, it benefits all the Western world, because those bombers are the same bombers that would be sending nuclear weapons to Europe or to the United States for that matter. This is a huge strategic win. And so for Donald Trump to say that, it just shows that he's biased towards Putin, and nobody else has that opinion.
So late last week, Donald Trump was hosting the new German Chancellor, as you said, Friedrich Merz, at the Oval Office, and he had an interesting analogy when it came to the war bill. He said he considered Zelensky and Putin to be two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other. They're fighting in a park, and you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I've given that analogy to Putin yesterday. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, again, this shows Donald Trump's bias towards Vladimir Putin. It shows he somehow projects some kind of moral equivalence to both of them. Vladimir Putin is the invader. He's the aggressor. He's the one who launched a full-scale invasion of a peaceful sovereign state, a neighbor state, Ukraine. Ukraine is the victim. Ukraine is defending themselves from an aggressor. And so for him to say it's just like two guys scuffling in the park it's an insult to the unbelievable bravery of the Ukrainian people to hold up so well. I mean, it's an injustice that's unimaginable. They're just sitting there trying to stop the murder of their own people. And for Donald Trump to criticize them is just so awful that it's hard to even put words on it.
Zelensky responded, well, we saw the Kremlin's response to the park analogy, saying that the war was an existential issue, but then we saw President Zelensky saying that we are not kids with Putin at the playground in the park. He's a murderer who came to this park and killed the kids. So I wonder, Bill, how tough do you think it must be for Zelensky to try and bite his tongue as much as he can while also relying so heavily on this aid and intelligence from the United States and not wanting him to revoke it?
Well, it's an impossible situation, and it will eventually resolve itself in the worst case scenario, which is that the U.S. will withdraw their aid. And when that happens, he doesn't have to hold his tongue anymore, but there'll be, unfortunately, a lot more dead Ukrainians, because Putin, he just doesn't care. And by the way, this is not something new for Putin. When Putin launched his invasion of Chechnya, when he first came to power in 2000, he killed like 70,000 people. He completely leveled Chechnya. When he went into Georgia, same type of thing. Carpet bombing Syria. He doesn't care how many people die. He doesn't care what the consequences are. And he's doing the same thing in Ukraine. And the only difference between Ukraine and those other three examples is that Ukraine at least has some capability of fighting back, and some capability which is supported by Western governments. If we were all to withdraw from helping Ukraine, it would look just like Syria looks right now.
Bill, I want to get into this sanctions bill that's been proposed. It's a bipartisan bill from Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. Now, they've come forward this sanctions bill that would basically slap any country importing Russian energy with a 500% tariff. You and I have spoken about how effective this would be to cripple Russia's economy. But what we've found is right now it hasn't actually gone through the Senate, but so far there's around 80 senators out of 100 that are supporting this bill. Now, the Wall Street Journal has reported that the White House has quietly asked Senator Lindsey Graham to water down this sanctions bill. So when you see Trump threatening Putin across a number of months with these sanctions that would destroy his economy, why is he now stalling?
Because these were just words, not deeds. And if Donald Trump originally wanted to end this war in 24 hours. He comes in and he says to the Ukrainians, I want you to announce a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. They do. He then asks the Russians to do the same. They don't. And then it goes on and on and on. The Russians, instead of ceasefiring, launch the biggest attacks that Ukraine has ever seen on their civilian populations. Donald Trump doesn't sanction. He gives them more time. He gives them more time after that. And so he's not interested in punishing Vladimir Putin. That's obvious. And what's been helpful is that his position is unique to him. He's the only person in the United States that has this position. The American people don't have this position, and the Republican Party in Congress doesn't have this position, as is evidenced by the unbelievable bipartisan support for this piece of legislation, which would basically put Putin out of business. And so it's no surprise to me to have read that same article in the Wall Street Journal about how they're pressuring, how the Donald Trump and his administration is pressuring the U.S. Senate, or I should say, Lindsey Graham, who's the author of that bill, to water it down so he doesn't have to do what would be the right thing to do here. And the real question is, will Lindsey Graham roll over? Because Lindsey Graham is notorious as a friend to Ukraine and as an enemy to Vladimir Putin. I know him well, and I know that his position is strong and it's sincere. And the question is, will he roll over here? Because if he does, then the bill is not going to end up kneecapping Putin and putting him into an impossible position.
Well, what is interesting about this bill is that this sanctions bill it didn't need to be written in the sense that foreign policy comes down to the US president. So what it shows to me is by having two bipartisan senators write a bill and get 80 senators to back it just shows that there's obviously a bit of a divide going on within Congress and within the Senate, that people really do believe that Trump needs to be harsher on Vladimir Putin, so much so that they've gone and done the hard work behind the scenes and they're proposing it to Trump. And he's not only saying that it needs to be watered down, but he's apparently, according to Senator Roger Wicker, quite literally asked them not to bring it to the Senate and vote on it yet. So I wonder what amendments he's planning on making, if he plans on even looking at it, if it gets to his desk. But we also saw that Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, he said that Moscow's stance on the war will not be altered by sanctions. He said that US hotheads who have lost the remnants of common sense in the US Senate because they don't know that this is the reality. But do you believe that, Bill, that Russia won't change their stance if they are hit with these sanctions?
Well, I mean, Russia, if they get hit with these sanctions, they'll be out of business in 3 months. That's as simple as that. They can huff and puff and make all sorts of grand statements, but in the end of the day, if they run out of money, they can't conduct the war, and then they'll be in a position where they either will be defeated or they have to negotiate a reasonable settlement. And so this sanctions bill is a very powerful tool that, by the way, doesn't cost the American public any money at all. In fact, is a revenue generator if they end up with these tariffs, these 500% tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil. And so this is probably the most the U.S. can do in addition to continuing military aid to end this war. And if Trump really wants to end this war, this is what he would do.
So, Bill, if this does get passed in the Senate and it goes onto Trump's desk and he doesn't sign it, or he makes several amendments that completely take away the reason for the bill in the first place, does that make any sense to you? Looking at it does it make any sense why Donald Trump would not sign this off?
The legislative branch is a co-equal branch of government to the executive branch, which means that if Congress passes a law and they pass it with more than 75% votes, then there's nothing that the president can do other than sign it. He cannot veto the bill. He cannot amend the bill. He can't do anything to the bill. And therefore, with 80 senators supporting this piece of legislation, assuming that he doesn't strong-arm these people into changing it, then the legislation will go through. But of course, there's a lot of other cross currents in U.S. politics. Trump is a big, notorious power player who uses his power to threaten people in all sorts of ways. And so it's hard to know what will happen. But presuming that the sentiment continues and presuming that they could get this vote to the floor, then what we're going to see is that Trump doesn't really have any choice in the matter. And presidents always make the argument that they should be the only people involved in foreign policy, but Congress has the ability to pass laws that are involved in foreign policy, and this is one example.
Well, let's hope that it gets to the Senate this week. So, Bill Browder, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.